So hey everybody, I am Dr. Graham Atkin. I teach a lot of students at MSU. I teach our MD students, I teach our DO students, I teach resident physicians at Sparrow Hospital, I teach our undergrads, and I really enjoy education. And I began my career as a neuroscientist, and the reason that I'm a neuroscientist is because when I was a young child, every time there was a gift-giving holiday, like a birthday or Christmas, that sort of thing, my grandfather would give me a book from this collection of books he had amassed. My grandfather was an arson investigator for the city of Detroit, and he loved puzzles and mysteries, and so that's what, and science books, and so that's what he would give me, and that's what I came to love, was science and puzzles and mystery. So there's no greater puzzle and mystery than the brain, and so that's what I ended up studying. But as I went along, I really wanted to share that fascination with puzzles and mysteries with other people, and so education was a great venue for doing so. And not every puzzle has to be the brain level complexity to teach us a lot of things. I have this pen here in my pocket, and if I let go of this pen, it's gonna drop to the earth, right, because of gravity. And what's fascinating is just a simple action like that can teach you about a force that is present throughout the universe and holds the planets in place like that. So we can look at something simple and learn a lot from it. And we're gonna try to do that. I'm gonna try to do that this evening with a pretty simple thing. Now, I did mention I am an educator, so I am, unfortunately, going to start with a pop quiz. No cheating, please. I'm just going to ask you, and it's okay if you get this wrong. I got this wrong earlier today when I was working on this talk. Without checking, can you tell me where your keys are right now? You don't need to tell me I don't know where you're but do you know where your keys are? It's okay if you don't, and it's okay if sometimes you forget where your keys are. Everybody forgets where their keys are. Sometimes it is really not a cause for concern, except, dun, 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 when it is. And so we're going to talk about when is it a cause for concern, and what does that tell us about how memory works. And so we're going to go through a number of different scenarios, each of which will answer the sentence, I misplaced my keys because, and then we'll talk about what is going on in those different scenarios. So the first of these is I misplaced my keys because I wasn't paying attention, right? This is an extremely common reason. So we're going to talk about when it's normal and when it's a concern you might want to discuss with a doctor. So it's normal because short-term memory really requires attention and acetylcholine, which Dr. Counts talked about, in order to be recorded. Your brain is receiving information all of the time, and it doesn't want to keep all that information. It's going to sort out what's important and what's not. And acetylcholine is one of these things that allows it to encode when your brain says, hey, this is important, remember this. So if you aren't saying, hey, this is important, remember this, the brain's just going to let it go. So if your attention was elsewhere, of course you don't remember. If you were, answering a phone call, if suddenly there was a fire outside, if your dog was running, it's totally to be expected that you're not going to remember where your keys are. However, if you paid full attention and you still can't remember, that starts to be a source of concern. If you were paying attention and it didn't come through, or if you just can't seem to focus your attention on one thing, if your attention is constantly switching and you really can't stay focused, that might be something that you want to talk to your doctor about. These are all things that can be addressed medically to varying degrees, but those are conditions where not knowing where your keys are might give you pause for concern. The next sort of phase of that would be multitasking. Everybody multitasks these days. You're on your phone, you're doing all sorts of other stuff. And so it's common to misplace your keys if you're multitasking. And again, it's fairly straightforward. Multitasking splits your attention. I have some students in my med school classes right now who can do 50. They can watch Netflix and listen to me lecture, and they'll still ace the exam, and great for them. But for the rest of us, multitasking is not great and really splits your attention. And of course, you're going to forget where your keys are. I remember putting my sunglasses down to bring them with me today, and I was doing 50 other things and just completely forgot them. And did not remember until I was almost here. So when to see a doctor is if you paid attention but still can't remember, just like in our last thing, you're focusing your attention, you're not multitasking, and you still can't do it. Or if that multitasking is in the form of intrusive thoughts, if you cannot stop yourself from thinking about too many things at once, even when you if you find my voice cutting out suddenly, it's time to see a doctor. No, if you have intrusive thoughts that distract you and make it difficult for you to focus, that is also something where you would want to see a doctor. Another reason, I was tired. So sleep and attention are inextricably linked. If you think about sleep, when you are asleep, if sleep is going well, you're kind of insensitive to the rest of the world. You're not hearing the clicking, the ticking clock or the dog barking, whatever. You're just soundly asleep until somebody says your name. So you're selectively paying attention for certain things. Same thing when you're paying attention when you're awake. You are filtering out all of the stuff you don't want to pay attention to and honing in on the thing you want to pay attention to. So they're similar systems, right? And so understandably, if you're not getting enough sleep, your attention system isn't going to work. If we don't have good attention, we don't retain memories. So if you're tired, memory slips happen. Totally understandable. If you pulled an all-nighter watching the new season of something on TV, yeah, you're not going to remember the next day. It's totally understandable. But if you have prolonged sleep disturbances or daytime sleepiness, then it's probably time to talk to a doctor. Something else could be going on. Sleep apnea is one of the first things that you will get screened for when you go in if you have a concern about dementia, because sleep apnea is what we call a dementia mimetic. It is something that is not dementia, but that looks like dementia. And it's something treatable, right? You get a CPAP machine, and then you're within about 2 weeks, those symptoms are going to clear up. So sleep is really important, and can certainly, if you're not getting good sleep, can result in memory troubles. I was anxious. So we're going to talk a little bit about anxiety and depression here for a moment. The really fun topics that everyone wants to talk about. You're all going to feel more anxious when we're done. That's inevitable. It is normal to have gaps in memory when you are feeling anxious. Anxiety can be good when it is directed at something that is causing you harm. That's why anxiety exists, right? That's why stress and anxiety exists. It's an evolutionarily developed system to protect you. If you didn't have that stress, if you didn't have that anxiety, you would miss out on things that were threatening to you. So we do want some anxiety, and when you are in an anxious state, memory is not the most critical thing, and so completely normal to have some gaps in memory, and anxiety really focuses your attention, filters your attention on that thing that concerns you. So other things will just sort of fade away because your body is saying, your brain is saying, we have to focus on this is the threat, don't worry about the rest of the stuff. And often if the anxiety is during a moment that's stressful or negative, your brain won't remember those things because those memories are really unpleasant, so you just sort of filter those out as well. But if you feel anxious and you can't get a handle on it, so that stressful thing goes away and you're still feeling anxious, or if anxiety comes on a lot, that might be cause to see a doctor. Anxiety that is frequent or pervasive is not a good baseline. I know the world is constantly throwing things at all of us, personal, political, worldwide, but if that anxiety doesn't relent, then it's probably time to see a doctor. And we'll delve into this a little bit further with the relationship between anxiety and dementia. So let's talk about that. There are 3 different relationships of anxiety to dementia. Anxiety as a response to dementia concerns. You are concerned about dementia, and therefore you feel anxious. Really, anxiety can arise from any health concern, cognitive or otherwise. Any health concern can do this. A few weeks ago, without having done any tests or any careful blood work or anything, a medical provider told me that I have cancer. It took several weeks and a out-of-pocket biopsy to confirm that I do not have cancer. But during those weeks, I was convinced that I had cancer and was anxious constantly. And my memory was foggy. I couldn't get my work done because I was just constantly worried that this would happen. Now, I have, not to pat myself on the back or whatever, but it's important for this. I have a bachelor's degree, 2 master's degrees, and a PhD, and I work in med school, and I'm around clinicians all the time. So I knew that's not how you diagnose cancer, is without doing any tests. And even still, when that provider in that setting said that to me, immediately my anxiety went off, because anxiety is not it does not concern itself with your education or the facts of the situation. It is just about sending up that red flag and protecting you, right? So anxiety is going to kick out. So anxiety can come up about health concerns. There's even a thing called illness anxiety, which is where you can have fear of a symptom so much that you start experiencing that symptom. It is a psychological phenomenon. And so anxiety is quite powerful. Of course, anxiety can therefore impact your memory, which then in turn adds to your fears. If you're worried that your memory isn't working and it causes you so much anxiety that your memory you're not paying attention to stuff and you have more memory slips, and you're like, I've convinced myself, now I have this thing. Anxiety as a sign of dementia concerns, a canary in the coal mine, so to speak. Impairment of frontal lobe function may be a sign of degeneration. So as Dr. Counts talked about, frontal lobe role in executive function, planning, thinking, all that sort of advanced stuff, personality things. When we start to see that slip, this may be a sign of some degeneration. And acetylcholine, there in sort of basal forebrain, the bottom of the forebrain, that's where acetylcholine is produced, used by the brain for attention. And those cells are disproportionately degenerated in many dementias. So attention is going to go right along with those executive functions, right? Changes in anxiety or attention may appear well before other symptoms. There are a number of studies that looked at folks who had dementia diagnoses, and prior to that, sometimes several years prior to that, people reported problems with anxiety, problems with attention. And remember, anxiety and attention very closely linked. So could this be a sign of dementia concerns? And finally, anxiety as a contributor to dementia. So is anxiety actually able to change the course of dementia? So let's talk a little bit about how anxiety works. So anxiety and stress are evolutionarily very old, right? When we look at the brain structures involved in anxiety, they're about 225 million years old. Most of mammalian evolution was this nightmarish crucible of tooth and claw and blood and different organisms fighting each other. And so systems like fear and stress and anxiety were really good for keeping you alive. And the idea was when you encountered a tiger or whatever, you would get this transformation in you, this fight or flight response that would either allow you to defeat the tiger or get away from the tiger. And then once the tiger situation was resolved, that stress pathway would turn off. We as modern humans don't encounter tigers as often, but we do have stress, and that stress is constant. So our stress stuff is just on all the time. And working for our favor are the parts of the brain that regulate anxiety and stress, the higher thinking parts of the brain in the cortex. But those are much younger. They first appear about 225,000 years ago. So that's a long time. 225 million years to 225,000 years is a long time for those anxiety pathways to get set in, right? Those newer parts of the brain that help control your fear are also much younger. They are much more fragile. They're much more energetically demanding. By energetically demanding, I mean they need calories and glucose and things like that to work. And so anything that deprives you of those things may affect your frontal lobe functioning. Think about people who get hangry. That hangry is the unmasking of those 225 million year old survival pathways, right? That the beast in them is coming out because they're not feeding those more sort of civilized parts of their brain. So changes in attention, well, that's a typo. All right, let's go on. Everybody's got them tonight. Memory lapse. You're welcome for the example. Okay, let's talk about some brain parts. So where do feelings of fear come from? Well, they are generated in a part of the brain called the amygdala. The amygdala is in your temporal lobe, which Dr. Counts talked about. And the amygdala is sort of the security system for your brain. It remembers everything that has ever hurt you. And its job is to recognize situations that are similar to that previous hurt and alert your brain so that you don't get hurt by them again. So if every time I touch this pedestal, I get a shock, then my amygdala is going to remember, and the next time I see this pedestal, my brain's going to go, don't touch that thing, you're going to get shocked, right? The hypothalamus allows us to produce the physical expression of fear. So this might be things like your pulse racing, your pupils dilating, you begin to sweat, all that sort of stuff. That fight or flight response is carried out by the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus is in charge of things like your respiration rate, your digestion rate, your blood pressure, all that sort of plumbing stuff in your body. And finally, we have the cortex, which is the control over fear. This is the more civilized, younger, sort of more energetically demanding part that I talked about. And a typical response would go like this. Your amygdala, so all this sensory information that you're taking in all the time, the things you see, the things you hear, that's all getting sent to all these different parts of the brain, including the amygdala. And so when the amygdala sees a situation, there's a pedestal over there, it is going to begin this reaction. And it's going to tell the hypothalamus, begin the fear response. We've got to get ourselves ready to fight this tiger or fight this pedestal or whatever it is we're doing. And so you get this sort of go command that it does all these things, including a change in your attention. The rest of the world melts away because all you're going to focus on is the thing you're concerned about. Your body will also release a very, very powerful chemical called cortisol. Cortisol makes you strong. It suppresses it turns off everything that isn't about survival. So it suppresses your immune system, suppresses your digestion. It's the turning from Bruce Banner into the Hulk sort of chemical. and that gets released. And that's great when you're fighting a tiger. But if your brain wants to stop that fear response and say, we're safe now, or that tiger you're seeing is on TV, it's not a real tiger, we don't need to be afraid of it, the cortex can send out these sort of stop commands, both to the amygdala and to the hypothalamus, and say, we don't need this response, we're fine, is everything good? Or we're safe now, we don't need to have this response. You don't want the stress response on all the time because it burns up your body. It is not good for you. It's not intended to function that way. It's just supposed to be a temporary boost. But you leave it on all the time, bad things can happen. But here's the trouble. If it is on all the time, even at sort of, not crisis levels, but just sort of a constant go, that cortisol has another effect. And that cortisol is that it will stop the cortex. So those neurons in the cortex, those brain cells in the cortex, respond to cortisol and they get suppressed because cortisol is saying, we need to fight, we need to unmask that beast, don't bother thinking, don't bother planning, just lash out. And over time, those neurons, in the presence of enough cortisol, will begin to degenerate. They will begin to die off, right? Because that cortisol is too much for them. And so we see these stop commands go away, and now we've got this sort of feed-forward mechanism. And oftentimes in cases of neurodegeneration, you'll see people who have a lot of anxiety, or they become emotionally labile, meaning their emotions change very quickly, or they become aggressive, or they become irritable. All that sort of stuff is, again, because these thinking, civilized parts begin to get suppressed by the level of cortisol and anxiety that's running through these bodies. And certainly memory gets affected by that. So again, risks to cortex. Anxiety can weaken cortex. The pathology of neurodegeneration can also weaken cortex, and so the combine of those two is not great. Now, we may not be able to do much about the neurodegenerative part yet. Some of the drugs that Dr. Counts talked about may be quite promising. But we can and should do something about the rest of the anxiety. And I realize that's foolish to say. As my clinical colleagues told me when I was freaking out about this diagnosis, they were like, that's not a thing, stop worrying about that thing. And I realized that that's not how the brain works. But anything you can do to cut down on anxiety will help with memory, will help with slowing the disease course, all of these sorts of things. That includes staying connected to organizations like Miles for Memories, staying connected to each other, getting support groups, feeding that civilized part of your brain with literal food and sleep and taking care of yourself, all those things to try to combat that anxiety to help with this situation. Another situation, I misplaced my keys because I was feeling down, and I don't care about my keys. I don't even want to leave my house. I don't care about this. That sort of mental situation, which might be depression, might be sort of flat affect, that, troubling events, any troubling event can impact mood and turn your focus inward. You don't want to go out, and so that's fine. If you don't care about your keys for a day because you're upset about something, that's totally understandable. Everybody grieves in their own way. Maybe that's the way that you grieve. And again, this can be a normal part of processing emotions, and so it's common that you don't remember things, right? If you've recently lost a loved one, you're not going to be remembering where your car keys are or where the remote is or whatever because you're just focused on other stuff. That's totally understandable. But if this doesn't improve over time or with counseling, or if this is impacting your self-care to the point that you're not looking after yourself, you're not feeding yourself, you're not sleeping properly, or when you have intrusive or dangerous thoughts as a response to these adverse events, then it's time to see a doctor. And the relationship between depression and dementia is very similar to what we discussed with anxiety. Depression can be caused by concerns about brain health. If you're worried about the future, that depression is not uncommon. And then that depression can affect things like memory and reinforce those fears. It can be a sign of brain health concerns. We know now that anxiety and depression are part of the pathology in most neurodegenerative diseases, regardless of what they are. And it can be, in that way, a contributor to dementia. But do not despair, because as they say in, was it Dune, I think? Fear is the mind killer. Despair is not going to help things, right? So again, trying to connect with others, trying to connect to organizations like Miles for Memory, trying to take care of yourself, sleeping, eating, breathing, sleeping, right? We had this terrible trauma at Michigan State, and my students would come to me and say, what do I need to do? I would say, the protocol is you eat, you breathe, and you sleep. That's the priority thing. So making sure you're doing all of those things. So just to summarize, both depression and anxiety can result from concerns about your health. Even if your health is fine, you can have these things out of fear of your health. Both involve changes in neurotransmitter systems that typically keep the brain functioning. So these are aberrations in neurotransmitter stuff, and sometimes that's brought about by adverse effects, and sometimes that's brought about by degeneration, and sometimes it's both. Both are part of the disease process in dementia. So in cases of dementia, these systems are affected, and both can contribute to the disease process. But the good news is, isn't it time for some good news? There is help available for both. Some of the things we talked about, staying socially connected, eating, breathing, sleeping, getting mental health care, all of these things can help. Going to the doctor. I know going to the doctor itself can cause a lot of anxiety. I've given you a nightmarish doctor story already. Maybe you're like, well, I'm just never going to the doctor again. But if you don't go to the doctor, you can't get that help that exists for those things. If you go to the doctor, there's the possibility of getting help for those things. Many things are improved by going to the doctor, and so we definitely want you to do that. Okay, just a couple of other quick ones to be aware of. So if you're saying I can't find my keys and I've been so low energy recently, could be a vitamin deficiency or other metabolic concerns. So these are two other dementia mimetics that a good neurologist will screen for. Vitamin deficiency can cause things that look like dementia, as can other sort of metabolic concerns. If you're saying I just can't think clearly at all, no matter what I do, the question to ask is since when? When did this start? Because certain medications and combinations thereof can interfere with thinking, can interfere with memory formation. So it may just be that there's a combination of medications that you're taking that isn't right and just needs to be tweaked by a pharmacist, or that you have a medication that's just not right for you and that's a side effect and you don't want that side effect, so you pursue a different one. And we've been hearing a lot about long COVID, that this can induce a sort of memory fog that makes it tough to remember. And so just being aware of those things and keeping a record of, when did the foggy memory start? This, again, is why social connection is so important. Even if you can't remember, maybe somebody can remember for you and say, it's been since you started taking this Medicare, since you got COVID, this has been happening. If you say, I can't remember my keys, but man, I used to remember everything, and now I don't remember everything. Well, that's only partly true. So transience is common with age, right? You're not going to remember everything, and letting go of some memories is a completely normal part of aging. And the reality is, you used to know far fewer things than you know now. You used to remember everything because you used to know 3 things, and now you know 8 billion things, and you can't keep them all in. Think of how much life you have lived and all the things you have learned. Nobody can hold that many things. So it's completely normal that some of those memories get shelved, right, or put into a recycling bin, so to speak. Transience is extremely common and not to be worried about unless it's memories that are really important to you, like the names of your kids or things like that. Then it's I would talk to a doctor. But again, not remembering the book you read when you were 14, that stuff happens. Okay, and so what if it is dementia? So remember that we're going to talk a little bit about dementia and dementia types, and this is actually not my talk. This talk was a talk that was laid out by a student of mine. I brought some students. Well, I brought a student. The other one, unfortunately, got COVID. So I reorganized her slides and added into mine. So we're going into phase 2 of the talk here. And this is, again, we're going to talk about dementia and dementia types here. So to start off, a reminder that dementia just means a loss of cognitive function as compared to an established baseline. It's not just changes to memory. That established baseline is really important. So if you go to a doctor's office and you are concerned about, there's a thing called self-reported cognitive decline, there needs to be some sort of sense of where that decline began. And this is why connection is really important. Having a good relationship with a neurologist or with a partner or a loved one or family or what have you, so that they can get a sense of what that decline was. Because if it's not a decline from baseline or if it's a really steep decline from baseline, that information is necessary for getting a sense of whether this is dementia. We're going to talk about 4 major types of depression. This isn't all the types of depression. It's just sort of the 4 ones that we mainly talk about. And I do this because I think it's important to know that not all dementias look the same. They don't all present the same. And so while we talked a lot about memory, not all dementias are memory or not just memory. So the first one, which Dr. Counts talked about so well, is Alzheimer's disease. This is obviously the sort of the big one, thought to be caused by accumulation of amyloid beta and tau proteins, which you heard about briefly. Very much impacts attention and short-term memory first because of the pathology, wipes out those cells that are involved with production of acetylcholine, which is necessary for attention, and attention in turn is necessary for short-term memory, so those functions are affected first. Progresses to impair long-term memory, decision-making, orientation to place and person and time. Orientation to place is where are you, person is who are you, time is when are you, and can include, there's quite a range, but as the disease advances, can include things like apathy, sort of a flat affect, or anger, for some of the reasons we talked about, restlessness, problems with self-care, and much more. Strength and sensation, so your muscle strength and your ability to feel things, are typically less affected in this disease. For reasons we do not understand, those parts of your brain tend to be relatively spared. The second we'll talk about is vascular dementia. So vascular dementia is dementia that results from disruptions in blood flow to the brain. So your brain needs blood all the time. It cannot go more than just a few seconds without blood, or bad things start to happen. Your neurons are very fragile and they need blood all the time. So any disruption to that blood flow can impair brain function. So this could be due to stroke or just the narrowing of blood vessels through atherosclerosis. The presentation really depends on which blood vessels are affected. So if you think about the streets here in Battle Creek, imagine blocking one street and what businesses would be closed versus blocking another street and which businesses would be closed, and how many businesses would be closed if you blocked, say, Michigan versus one of the smaller side streets. So too, affecting different blood vessels will affect your brain differently. If you have big vessels affected, you're going to see big changes pretty quickly versus smaller changes over time if you have multiple small vessels. Memory is not typically impacted first, and that's because, weirdly, memory is a function that requires both sides of your brain to work together, and if you have only one side damaged, memory is more or less intact. So we think about blood vessels. There's blood vessels on the right side of your brain, blood vessels on the left side of your brain, and they don't directly, for our purposes, they don't directly connect. So to get both of those affected in a stroke is less likely. But we do see other changes, including things like personality and planning changes. And they can also include what we call focal signs. So focal signs are neurological deficits that tell us immediately where the problem is located. So there's certain areas of the brain that have very specific functions. And if those specific functions are affected, we know right away, it's that spot. There are other neurologic findings that don't really have a specific spot that we know about. These are things like headache or visual hallucinations or, delirium, right? That's sort of a whole brain phenomenon. But you can have focal signs like weakness or numbness of particular body regions and we go right away, there was a stroke there, that explains what's going on. One of the things about vascular dementia is this sense of sort of a stepwise decline. So with Alzheimer's, you think about a gradual but progressive decline. With vascular dementia, it happens when the blood vessels are damaged. So one of my uncles had this, and there was a big change right away, and then he sort of stayed at that plateau for a while, and then there was a jump to another one when he had another stroke, and now he's at a new level of pathology or symptoms, and then there was another jump. Rather than that gradual decline, it was sort of like blood vessel personality change, blood vessel other change. So that sort of stepwise change can help a doctor understand the difference between, is this vascular dementia or is this Alzheimer's disease? Frontotemporal dementia is so named because it affects the frontal and temporal lobes, which you heard about just previously. It is thought to be caused by the mishandling of proteins inside of brain cells, and these include tau, which also shows up in Alzheimer's disease, and a protein called TDP43 that shows up in a bunch of these diseases, including Parkinson's. These are proteins that are on their own kind of wobbly, and they need other proteins to help them make the right shape so that they can function correctly. And when a neuron gets sick, they can't make that wobbly shape into the right shape, and they just sort of glom together in that wobbly shape and cause problems. So they show up in a lot of diseases. There are 3 different versions of frontotemporal dementia, and these include profound changes to behavior and personality, usually resulting in sort of inappropriate behavior, and it's uncharacteristic inappropriate behavior. So it's somebody who is normally, great citizen or whatever, and then all of a sudden they are doing some very strange things. So often like very public urination is one that comes up a bunch, just really unusual behaviors. Difficulty with speaking, understanding, or finding words. This is sort of a progressive aphasia variant. Or there's even a version that has uncontrolled movements, so physical movements that are affected. If there are changes to memory this is frontotemporal dementia, also sometimes called frontotemporal lobar dementia, so FTD or FTLD. If there are changes to memory, it's typically later in disease progression, and there are some folks who have frontotemporal dementia and never have their memory affected. There was a family member who had this and never had memory issues, and it caused a lot of trouble because they put him into housing that was specifically for sort of Alzheimer's folks, and he could remember everything. He was saying, "I'm fine, I don't have this stuff," but his behavior had changed quite a bit, and it was really hard to care for him appropriately, and eventually had to figure out this is FTD, not Alzheimer's, so the care had to be different. The final version we're talking about is dementia with Lewy bodies. It's thought to be caused, again, by mishandling of proteins inside of brain cells, including tau and TDP43. This first includes progressive difficulty with memory, decision-making, and planning, and often includes visual hallucinations. Visual hallucinations can show up in Alzheimer's and Parkinson's and other things, but they're less common than in DLB. And this is a key thing, is so first there are these cognitive functions, and then typically within a year after that, you'll develop Parkinsonian features. So Parkinsonian features just means features that are like what you see in Parkinson's disease, and that includes things like bradykinesia, shuffling gait, slowness and rigidity of movement, that sort of thing. That order of symptoms is important for a neurologist to figure out what's going on. Because in Parkinson's disease, you can have the Parkinsonian features first, and then the cognitive stuff can come later. Here, it's cognitive stuff first and Parkinsonian stuff later. So getting that order will help a neurologist to figure out which disease is going on. So, that's a lot of information. Let's just sum up. Sometimes the keys just get misplaced, and that is fine. The keys get lost all the time, that's fine. Less often, it's part of a pattern of things being outside the norm, and in those cases, it is worth checking with your doctor. And if you don't like your doctor, get a different doctor. There are so many doctors. We're making new doctors all the time. You're going to meet a new one in just a minute. And he can't take patients yet, but soon. And don't stick with a doctor you don't like. Part of the reason to check is that not all dementias look the same, and the sooner you catch it, the better. And that's not just for managing the disease, because again, we're fairly limited in that. It's also for things like financial planning and social planning and getting you resources that you need and managing your expectations so you don't get anxiety and depression, which will then make things worse. The number one thing that a good doctor will do is to take away that anxiety and depression at the bedside, even if they can't treat the disease itself. And if they're not doing that, get a different doctor. But probably you just left your keys in the other room.
Your grandfather and I moved to Michigan a very, very long time ago. But my grandparents, your great-great-grandparents, came to America from China. Your grandma was a very beautiful person, and she used to tell me a wonderful story about the New Year's monster Nyan. Nyan loved to visit the villages in China each year, and tricking everybody he saw. He believed it to be great fun. At the beginning of each new year, Nyan would fly through the villages, playing tricks and messing about with the villagers. He could hardly...
Grandma?
Oh, Monica, have I ever told you the story of Nyan, the New Year's monster?
Grandma, you were already telling me the story about Nyan.
Oh? I'm sorry,
It's okay, honey. Monica, why don't you go and play? Your grandmother's a little tired right now.
But Grandma was telling me a story.
She'll tell you the story later, I promise. Go and play and we'll finish the story later.
Okay. There now, to draw the dun-dun-dun feet. Mom! What's wrong? Grandma was telling me a story, and she was talking to me, telling me about a New Year's monster. And then she forgot she was telling me the story and began to tell me the story from the beginning. And then Grandpa told me to go and play before Grandma could finish telling me the story, and I want to know what happens with Nyan. Slow down, honey. Take a deep breath and tell me what happened. Something's wrong with Grandma. What do you mean? Grandma was telling me a story, and halfway through she completely forgot she was telling me a story. Okay. But this isn't the first time. It's like she's not there sometimes. Like she's forgotten me and you and Grandpa. Here, come and sit next to me. So,
Do you remember a few months ago when Mom, your grandmother, spent a few nights away from home?
Yeah, you and Grandpa said she was taking a vacation.
Well, the truth is she was seeing someone about a problem she was having.
Problem?
Grandma has some memory issues. What the doctors call dementia.
Dentistia?
Dementia. Sometimes our brains start to break down. Not everyone, but with some people, they start losing their memories. They have trouble speaking and thinking. They start to lose those things that are most special to us. All the stories we love so much, their favorite memories, even their own name. And all of it begins to fade away.
Dementia sounds terrible.
It is. It's like a giant chalkboard with everything about you written down. Everything that makes you you, slowly being wiped away with only the blank empty chalkboard being left behind.
That's really scary.
It can be. It can be very scary to lose who you are.
Oh, I know. What if I follow Grandma, writing everything down and taking pictures, and then I can follow behind her and remind her of everything she forgets?
Oh, you're such a wonderful little daughter. But unfortunately, this isn't something that we can fix. Sadly, sometimes our bodies just start to break down. It's no one's fault. No one person or thing is to blame.
I don't understand.
I know. It's hard to grapple with. It feels overwhelming knowing that you're losing someone that's very special to you.
But what can I do? How do we fix Grandma?
Some things don't have a very easy answer, and it can be confusing and frustrating. But we must understand that all we can do right now is to help Grandma on this journey.
Well, that's not fair.
No, it's not.
How can I help Grandma if we can't fix this?
You love Grandma, right?
More than the entire galaxy.
Well, my darling, part of love is patience and understanding. Your grandmother is experiencing this new challenge, something that has her working very hard to hold on to her chi.
Chi?
Your grandmother would call it her life's essence, what makes her who she is, her chi.
Oh.
Your grandmother is trying very hard to maintain those pieces of her that make her special. And because we love her, and because she is the best mother and grandmother in the whole wide galaxy, we must have some understanding and have patience when she forgets that she was telling us a story, or maybe forgets where her glasses are.
So the best we can do for her is love her?
We are her family, my darling girl. We love her unconditionally. But don't forget, in addition, she needs our understanding and patience as much as she needs that unconditional love.
Love, understanding, and patience.
Love, understanding, and patience. Those three things are the greatest help that we can give to your grandmother right now.
Love, understanding, and patience. I can do that.
I know you can. Now go on and play. Mama has work to do.
Where did I put my glasses?
They're on your head.
Ha! They are. What's this?
That's your personal ID bracelet.
My personal...
Your personal ID bracelet. See, I'm wearing one too. If you ever get lost or something happens to you, that bracelet is there to help you and others find your way back home. Anyone with a cell phone can take their phone's camera, and using the QR code on the bracelet, they can learn your name and your contact information. That bracelet shares your phone number, and if we are separated, it allows them to call me or Danny and let us know where you are and if anything has happened.
Whoa.
And I wear my bracelet so that if anything ever happens to me, they can help you if we are together. Let our daughter know, and most importantly, to let you know that you are never alone.
What a beautiful sentiment.
Anything for you, love.
Oh, Grandma! Grandma! Oh, Danny dear, could you please get me a cup of tea?
It's Monica, love, your granddaughter.
Oh, so it is. Come and sit by me, little one. I want to tell you a story about the New Year's monster, Nyan.
Dear, you've already started telling her that story.
Have I? I'm sorry, little one. What's this for? I love you, Grandma. I love you too, sweetie. And I promise to always be patient and understanding and always love you more than the entire galaxy. Where's all this coming from?
Oh, two of my favorite people. Let Grandpa get in on this group hug.
I learned a lot today about dementia. It's such a scary thought that my grandmother could lose those things about her that I love so much, that the blackboard in her mind is slowly being erased. But I also learned that with love, understanding, and patience, we can be there and help my grandmother through this very scary and trying thing. That my grandfather and mother are here and will do everything in their power to help my grandmother.
Hi, Monica. Hi, everyone. I'm on the leadership team for Miles for Memories. The organization itself began back in 2013 with a really strong commitment towards helping families as well as individuals that are impacted by dementia through movement, programming, and research. In addition to those things, we have lifestyle programs, a respite program, as well as the Safe Return programs. And the Safe Return programs is one of the things that her grandmother is wearing the bracelet on her wrist. We have been beneficiaries of sponsors and donors and magnificent volunteers, including the Michigan Health Endowment Fund. And with those dollars, we're able to take that bracelet program all across the state of Michigan. I want to thank you for joining us today. And if you need additional information, please reach out at milesformemories.org. Thank you.
Access Vision. Your voice, your community.